you have finally gotten your game ready. It's going to go into the store, maybe multiple stores. Maybe now it's time to get some big boy pants. Time to figure out what your build process is, how to automate it, and where to host it. That's what we're talking about in this episode of Dev Radio. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Microsoft Dev Radio. I'm Jerry, and I am here with Jennelle and Tobia, two of my absolute favorite evangelists. Let's start with my truly favorite, Jennelle. Jennelle, thanks for being on the show. I don't think I've ever had you on Dev Radio before.
You have not. This is the first time.
This is going to be my favorite episode. I can tell already. Now, you live next door to Tobia, so tell me just a little bit about where you guys are from and who you are, Jennelle, specifically.
Well, I
know you don't actually live next door to Tobia.
Yeah, we're close, but anyway, I am here in San Francisco, and I'm a technical evangelist. I've been one for 4 years, and I really focus on infrastructure, a lot of ops-related stuff, DevOps, and things like that.
Okay. More like an IT pro than a developer.
Yes, exactly. Most of the time.
Okay. You put the pro in IT pro, I guess.
Something like that.
IT, yes. Tobia, thanks for being on the show too, man. Now,
thanks for having me.
Let's see. I think you have been on the show.
I believe I have before, a long time ago, though.
Now, Tobia, what's your last name?
Zarlez.
Now, tell me the magic of your last name.
Well, I was Tobia Marks, and then I got married, and now I'm Tobia Zarlez, and that is unusual because I am male.
Yes. And you didn't take your wife's name.
No, we actually invented a new name for our new family. We kind of combined the letters a bit and made a whole new lineage. We still haven't made the family crest yet, but we'll get to it.
Well, you're not really married until you have a crest, so that's going to be, and a song. You're going to need a family song. So
that's true. That's true. We need to commission, the whole ordeal.
Then I'm desperately behind.
Like the All Blacks chant, where they go, whoa, whoa. You need one of those.
Oh yeah, handshake, whole 9 yards.
Now, Tobia, you're not an IT pro.
I am not. I'm actually a game developer in experience, and as an evangelist, I focus on talking to game developers, doing game development-related technology. I also touch along the DevOps space, as we're going to talk about here, and how you can use DevOps to help make games as well. And I am located in Mountain View. So according to you, Jerry, we are next door because we're both Northern California evangelists. But for Jennelle and I, one of us has to drive like an hour and a half to see each other.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, that's great. So you guys get to collaborate constantly, and I get to talk to you just today. That's great. Now, let's back up. We have a customer or a partner or affiliate, or I don't know what it's the right word. They are Goodbye Games. GoodbyeWorld Games, right?
GoodbyeWorld Games. So they started off as they were some students who made this really awesome, interesting game called Close Your. And they submitted to a bunch of festivals and won. It was selected at GDC, the IGF at GDC, I should say, and IndieCade. And so they said, all right, this is a real thing. Let's make a Kickstarter for it. And it was a successfully funded Kickstarter, and they got tens of thousands of dollars to make a company and start making this. But the problem was that these were fresh out of college students, game devs, who've had, some varying levels of experience amongst the whole team, but they did not have any formal build process. They really didn't even understand what I meant when I started talking about, hey, what is your build process? And so we kind of came up with a way to help them out that would greatly improve the amount of time it would take to build, or any game developer.
Now, they're not special, by the way. Any new or young company, they're faking it till they make it, right? And they all start without process and without all kinds. And the bigger they get, the more that, sometimes you can think of it as maybe architectural debt or something like that. The more that becomes painful, the more it becomes painful, the more they start to adjust. So it's not just something special for them. Almost anybody listening probably has experience with too little process. I'm sure many have too much process, but at the same time, there is this sweet spot where life can be happy. Life could
Yeah,
be
I
really
mean,
happy.
it's important to emphasize that they aren't like wrong. It wasn't that
Hmm.
they were doing it wrong because everyone's process can probably always be improved, right? There's no one
Yeah.
who has the perfect ideal process. It's always an ever-moving thing because, of course, processes should change as needs change as well. But yeah, as you said, a lot of companies, they start up and they focus on product, they focus on, doing things as quickly as possible. But then once they start getting to the day-to-day development, they realize, hey, we have some inefficiencies here that if we actually started formalizing this a bit, we can save hours per week.
All right, so let's pretend I do work for GoodbyeWorld Games, or I'm working for Jerry Games, and you walk up to me, say this to me, Tobia, and I say back to you, what is a build process? What are you even talking about? How do you explain it?
So we start off with a thing we call value stream mapping.
Okay.
And if you want to, I won't go too much in depth because we'll probably spend the entire show talking about what that means. There's a lot of great resources out there. Bottom line, though, for all of today, I would recommend reading the book, The Phoenix Project, probably one of my favorite technical manuals because it's written as fiction rather than an actual technical guidance. So you're reading like a dramatization story about a person going through a process. Anyway, I digress. We start with a value stream mapping, which basically just maps out, hey, how does bits go from an idea to something shipped in some way? Now, we're talking about a game in pre-development. That's shipping a test build to the end testers, whether they're internal or external. But in a live ops game, we're talking about the whole process. And thinking about, some coders work on some code, they commit it to this repository, some other coder might download it, check it, some person might on their machine then say, oh, this is ready, I'm going to build it, save it, put it in a zip file, put that zip file on Dropbox, share that link in an email to X, Y, and Z who approves it, then forwards that link going on. And, that might sound really familiar to a lot of different people. And it might not sound like that's a whole lot of steps, like, oh, I have to write an email and do these things. But once you start blocking out these blocks in the process, and you start putting numbers, like how long does that take? That takes me 5 minutes. That takes this. But then you factor in the wait time. Well, I have to send this email, and then I have to wait for this other person to look at it and get back. And that can take, up to 2 hours or longer if that person goes on vacation. You can easily identify what we call heroes in the process, where that person has to be involved. Otherwise, the build doesn't get created. And it's not necessarily because that person is so amazingly skilled that only them could possibly handle that process, but that the process is set up in such a way that only they have the tools or the resources available to do so. And once you map out that process, finding the solutions kind of inherently becomes obvious. And as you mentioned before, we work with this with tons of companies, big and small, who've never gone through this mapping process. And once you start formalizing and mapping it out, you can easily connect the dots and go, oh, wait, we can eliminate that by having the build go here and maybe setting up a system for automatically notify you there. And specifically talking about replicating a Unity cloud build process and building your own custom Unity cloud build, a lot of it can really get wrapped up in this awesome tool called Jenkins, which is an awesome open source project. You can set it up on a VM and handle all of the steps for you, from I committed something into my GitHub repo to notifying the right people on Slack to sending out a build to distributing that build to something like Hockey App, all handled automatically for you.
Now, before we get to the full solution here, let's talk about the politics of process reengineering, because there is something there. I step back and you're like, hey, you need to look at your process. And you're like, well, what should I look at? Well, you should look what people are involved and how do you rely on individuals, as part of the process. How long does it take? And how much pain is it? How much does it actually cost you to actually go through the process? Any of those seem big, then you can reduce. And you can always seem to reduce. And Jennelle, you go into a company. How do you start this conversation without calling their baby ugly?
Yeah, that's one of the hard parts. You do have to really go into this with an open mind, make it a really safe space where people can sort of point out flaws without getting, zinged for it some way. It has to be really open, and you have to bring kind of the right people in who are sort of willing to have that conversation. And sometimes some things are just, easy fixes. Some things are, larger process changes that you need to make. Yep. And sometimes you can't solve it all at once, but having this big map and being able to say, this is where we began, this is where we'd like to go, you can continue, you can build on that. You can come back a couple months later, run another process and be like, look, we really improved this part. Now we're going to go work on this next part. And it's really incremental, and it changes over time. And it's not, like Tobia said at the beginning, people aren't wrong. It's just that, there's a lot of different ways that you can do things better.
Yeah. It's a little bit like pulling teeth, too, because it's inevitable. You have to do it. You can ignore it as long as you want, but eventually you are going to grow up and you do need to lose these teeth, and it is going to be, you know what I mean? And so as companies look at this, they can resist it, but eventually it's going to catch them, and eventually they do it. Tobia, what's step number one? I have agreed. I am going to take a look at this. What's step number one when you're interacting with a customer?
So when we're starting the value stream mapping, as Jennelle said, you have to have the open mind, have to get it out there. And we don't offer any solutions to the problem until we fully understand what their process is. Because one of the things that makes talking about DevOps technology unique is that there really isn't just we're going to throw this, Jenkins, whatever keyword solution at you, and this is going to work, and here's how it'll fit in. But it really has to be a custom solution for every company and unique in what works and where something will fit in the process and where their heroics may be. So we are very careful not to try and because people, once they get into the process, they'll be excited and start thinking about, I can slim this down, I can slim this down.
Right.
And we usually at some point have to stop.
Let's break for lunch so I can go fix it.
Let's figure out this whole process first, and then from there we can have a discussion on solutions once we have the full big picture. And again, also like Jennelle said, it's not about, and let's solve the whole thing now after lunch, right? Like you usually have to look at, what are the top 3 problems that we could solve in 24 hours, right?
Yeah.
And there's one thing that we could spend 2 weeks working on this thing that might be the most efficient, but we could also spend a day doing this other thing, and that will save, 3-5 hours work per week. Might not sound like a lot, but then when you start doing the math for them and say, we've sacrificed, let's say 2 work days and 16 hours work. We're going to save 3 hours a week. We're going to be working on this project for 6 months. Hey, that actually works out pretty well math-wise.
Yeah, and you've got the future as well, right? Because who knows what's coming next, and the ultimate cost of software is maintenance in the first place. So I think that is really a valuable thing to just get people in the right, so everybody's in the right mindset. All the right people are in the room. We have filled the whiteboards with so many steps. Now, Jennelle, it's great that you're in the room because you're our DevOps expert. Tell me the DevOps product that Microsoft makes. Is it called Microsoft DevOps, or what's the name of it?
No. That's the thing. You can't actually really buy the DevOps. Every company has tools that fit in, and when you go into a company, you have to look at the tools that they're already using. We're not asking people to completely swap out what they're already doing with some sort of, magic solution, because there isn't one. So it's really about looking at what they're using, making suggestions about things that are out there, open source, full purchase products, those sort of things that might fit in, and how those tie together and what they're already using. You want something that people are comfortable using and are willing to use. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful, at the end anyway.
What do you say? My company, we're not comfortable with continuous integration, right? It's just too fast, too intense. Am I still a candidate for this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different levels of ways you can do any sort of the DevOps process, right? Continuous integration can scare people when they're talking about going to live, but you can also pitch them from a small scale, like maybe doing continuous integration internally for testing, or that's just one aspect of, maybe it's not continuous, but maybe every time the build goes up, it simply just saves it into an Azure cold storage, and you have that review, and you can tell them stories about, have you ever had a situation where you're working on the game and then some investor came on or some important person and you wanted to show them a demo, and then you pull up the latest build and it's, the last level's broken, or this part of it's broken because it's still in the middle of development. Who has the build from last week? It was the last week, the last stable build. Having that organized process solves a lot of problems before they happen.
And, tossing in a few, just to throw in a couple other things like automatic testing, just things that like some little sanity checks and things that you might skip over, you can automate in that process, even without going through the entire release. Just kind of like, every time we commit, hey, does it still run? Does it come on? Really simple things that can throw a wrench in later down the line.
And I think a lot of customers, they hear things like automated testing and they're like, we don't have time for that. But automated testing can test one method, and you've got automated testing in place. And now tomorrow you can write a test for a second method, and you can grow from there. It's not a matter of 100% code coverage on day one.
Yeah, you don't need to have deeply integrated automated testing. Like it just some versus none does a huge thing in itself. Is it just makes sure that your app runs. And if you have a app breaking bug, and there are bugs that come up that way that you don't realize.
Sure,
I've
heard of developers doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But having something that literally opens your app and makes sure that it's actually running can save you tons of time and headache by immediately letting you know, oh, by the way, that commit breaks the build.
Yeah. Yeah, that just a tiny drop like that is a great place to start. All right, let's go back to games. So what's special about the automated build pipeline for games?
I think there's a couple things that make games a particularly unique DevOps scenario. One is that I don't see as many people talking about it. In a lot of software development houses, you have a lot more IT pros involved in the process of the chain. There's a lot more experience coming in there. And a lot of game companies, especially small indie game developers, there's just less exposure to that. And so you see it, of course, tons in big game processes, and more people are picking it up. But as the tools are becoming more and more accessible and easier to attain, and the knowledge is out there, you're now seeing, these small startups and these mobile app studios start adapting these processes as well, and then becoming not just a side thing that we do, but core to their product and the way they're able to continuously deploy. In the freemium app space, for games in particular, is huge. And not, every game's a freemium game, but those games in particular are really services, not products. And so having continuous deployment, continuous testing is core to make that possible and happen, and be able to deliver content updates, on a weekly basis.
Yeah. And, it's funny. I think a lot of people don't know that cheat codes are built on purpose for testing. Like, how are you going to test level 9 without going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? So cheat codes are invented right for us, so we can go ahead and make those tests. It's a kind of a fun little.
Yeah, in big studios, you used to have to go through this months of testing, and you throw it over a wall to some, dark room where you have developers sit there and they play the game over and over and over again. And that's tons and tons of time resources. And I'm not saying that you don't need thorough testing, but just like how cheat codes were a tool to enable testers to be able to test certain aspects of the game more quickly, DevOps can add even more tools so the developers can deploy even more quickly. As a personal example, I'm making a multiplayer mobile game, and so it needs to deploy something onto 14 different phones. And it might sound silly, but just the notion of plugging in these phones one at a time, side loading, one at a time, side loading, one at a time, side loading, versus I make a commit, it builds in the cloud, then it individually pushes those files to all 14 phones, which download them and install them simultaneously. It's like magic once you get it set up.
Yeah, and it's such a good experience. Jennelle, listen, my company, we're talking about a build pipeline. We're putting it in place. You say to me, you probably should put it in the cloud. Why should I put it in the cloud?
Come on, everything belongs in the cloud, doesn't it these days? No. Well, in this particular case, it does make sense, particularly with the smaller game shops. You're not necessarily coming with a lot of operations experience, certainly not a lot of space or ability to, manage and rack hardware and kind of like build your own mini data center. So going ahead and using the cloud for that sort of thing is a great way to get started. You want that storage, you want that compute, you need that sort of stuff easily accessible. And in this particular case, you might not want that server running all of the time. So by building this in the cloud, you can actually, manage your costs a little bit by, say, only having it come on, during your work hours or when those builds really need to be built.
It is a funny situation where if I move to a place where I can scale to infinite size, it's a lot cheaper. It seems like it wouldn't be that way, but it really is.
Yeah, you scale to the size you need it to be, right? So if you have 100 developers and they all need to build at once, you can have 100 machines building just in that moment. But then if you have one developer who you really only need to build once a week, then you only need to pay for the server for once a week and however long it needs to take to build. And it ends up being a lot cheaper than people may fear.
There's no point in melting my MacBook in the corner, right? There's all 100 of us trying to build at the same time. Yeah. Now, Tobia, this is a Unity game that we're building, and doesn't Unity already have a service like this?
They do. So Unity has cloud builds, but there's some reasons why you might want to go for a custom solution. Unity cloud builds give you, just the basic options for just a couple platforms. So if you want to go to all of the platforms that Unity supports, first off,
including Windows
Store, you need to be able to build from Unity itself. But you also might have some custom requirements or SDKs or file types that you want to build. Perhaps you want to do some interesting things with your database. For instance, if you have a code base and then a separate code base for the assets. Maybe you have different assets per platform, or you have the coders can see one one code base, but you want to be able to keep private other resources or other aspects, and you can dynamically build them all together and do whatever custom script you want on your end in your own custom cloud build to be able to pull that exactly the app that you want to build, the exact custom version that has just the assets for that mobile or cloud version or whatever type of game you're building, especially if you're doing cross-platform. Build that, do that, and then the follow-through, you also get a lot more customization because rather than just simply here's the link, you can download it, now you can upload it to say an Azure cold storage, so you always have it. It's there. It's saved very, very cheaply. You can access it whenever you need to. You can revert back to it. You can then push it to various testers based on if it passed those tests, if it failed those tests. You can even have it ping someone on your internal Slack channel or hook up to any other service. You can even write some custom integration with a bot if you want to and have the person say, okay, send this back and continue on the steps there because it's your custom code that you can run and the sky's the limit on what makes sense for your process.
Well, now I have a custom build process. Jennelle, that means it's super flexible. Doesn't that mean it's more expensive?
No, it doesn't. When you're looking at building something on a VM in Azure, you're talking paying for compute, paying for storage. So it doesn't really matter what you're running on that server. It's just a matter of how you actually get it configured, which is, another challenge for smaller shops. Once again, not people who really specialize in managing servers from an ops standpoint. So one of the things that we really liked, what we looked at doing and wanted to do with this particular project was make it so that it could basically be one-line deployment using the CLI or using PowerShell, using templates and DSC, which is desired state configuration, to actually deploy the server, install all the software, and then just end with a running machine that they just need to log in and customize their Jenkins and their settings.
Nice. Okay, so when you say custom now, Tobia, you don't mean build from scratch. There are tools out there I can leverage.
Yeah, definitely. There's all sorts of tools from the process from Chocolatey lets you install whatever thing you want on the server. As I mentioned before, Jenkins is this amazing, robust piece of software that makes it incredibly easy to build process. I know I talked about all these different custom things, but it's literally drag and drop menu items in this UI, and it's
okay.
Once you understand what's going on, it's incredibly easy to be able to make whatever modular builds that you want. And this is an also side point too in this downloading. This is kind of another, going back a point to like why custom cloud builds in a process is so important, is that when you build this, you state version numbers. I'm building against Unity 5.5 versus 5.6. And if you use other services, you might get, whatever their latest is or the latest one. And latest sounds great, but when you're talking about, hey, you need to ship your game now and you've been testing on 5.5 and then, some new feature comes out or some new thing that you have to change something or some bug is introduced or something's different, problems arise and things that might not going to work. And generally, software companies try to give support as they go to the next versions to make sure it's legacy. But in a game, you might release a build and then 6 months later want to come back and port it to another platform or, make a version 2 or do something else. And then suddenly you're trying to remember, like, wait, was I using version 3 of this plugin or version 4? And what's the differences here? And defining your build process kind of locks in time those version numbers in that moment. So you can have full conscious aware of, I'm using these builds. And so that in the future, when you build again, you use those versions, it's going to work, it's going to build. And then you also know, hey, there's the latest version. You can consciously upgrade that, test it, make sure it works, and then continue the deployment that way.
Makes sense to me. Jennelle, a buddy of mine uses Amazon Web Services, and they have all kinds of stuff going. And they seem pretty happy. You're talking to me about Azure. It's compelling. What do I give up? Is it just Microsoft technology? I need to support the Windows Store, or tell me the Azure story.
You can put anything you want in Azure. Well over a quarter, it keeps going up, of our builds, of our workloads in Azure are Linux. So you can really build whatever you want. One of the great things about Jenkins is you can build it on a Windows server, you can build it on a Linux server. So you can bring whatever tooling, operating systems you're comfortable with and whatever command line, all that sort of stuff that you're already using on your workstation and control and manage and engage with Azure.
I like that. Okay. All right. Talk to me. Let's back up again. All right. So now it sounds like I can use Azure. It sounds like I've got some of these tools. Actually, Tobia, list off a couple of more of them. I want to do some investigation. It'd be nice to do some comparison. You told me about Jenkins. Run through a couple more that I might run into.
If you're making a Unity game and you're mostly, all internal Unity plugins aside, like I'm not talking about anything within the Unity asset store, from your Unity package, what tools you need to be able to make builds. It's actually not an extensive list. We used Chocolatey on the server to be able to download Unity itself and any other packages you may need from there. We downloaded Unity for our case in particular. Visual Studio on the server as well, because we are also wanting to make sure we support Windows builds. So, that makes sense there. And then we had to install and run Jenkins. And that's all that we needed.
Okay.
We integrated into Slack and other things, and so there was some API keys that we needed for certain tools, and those need to be gathered. But software itself, that core is all that was needed.
Okay. Jennelle, now be honest with me. My team, we've only got 2 developers. I'm going to say, stop all development. We want to build out this automated process. About how much time am I really looking at?
If you're already using a pre-existing template, which is something that we already provided, you can actually get a whole bunch of different basic VM templates out of like the Azure Quick Start area and things like that. So we started with one of those. We tweaked it a little bit so that we were using a VM size that we wanted, because the size of VM you pick relates to cost and things like that, what we needed. So we made sure we tweaked it for that. And then we just had this configuration script that used Chocolatey to pull down Jenkins and GitHub, Git, and all of the other components and install. From the time
I forgot
that you
to mention Git. That is definitely a tool that you needed there.
Yeah, definitely need that for the plugins to GitHub. But once we actually had that together and running, it took about 45 minutes to build.
Okay, so you're saying about a week.
Well, I guess, yeah, probably. It really depends on, you do have to either be talking to somebody who understands DSC configurations and, starting with ARM templates. But like I said, there's a bunch of starting points for that. So a lot of times you can just find something and be like, oh, well, this one's using like a super huge VM that I don't want to pay for. So I'm going to change the VM, in the JSON, and, it'll deploy what you want.
Right. So there probably is something there, but the value back is it's like, I guess if you mill the iron ore, if you design the car, build it, paint it, it only takes 45 minutes for it to dry, right? I mean, there's something funny there, but at the same time, you got to look at the reason we started this whole conversation was around process, the process that we identify what this step costs, what this step costs, what this step costs. And as we start introducing all this automation and all this magic that you can do, really, we start saying, okay, now we still have these 3 steps because we can't get past them, but those 3 steps now cost us this, and we can start putting real numbers and real value and say, like, this is worth its weight in gold. We can't afford not to do it.
And that's why we did the value stream mapping process in the first place, because we're not just saying, here, apply Azure Cloud, it'll be good, trust us.
Right, run this in Azure and everything's better.
Start it. we can determine with pretty good accuracy exactly how many hours per week you're going to save by implementing this process. And, we can estimate how long things are going to build, and, there may be bugs, there may be learning involved, but even being flexible with those numbers, you can usually find pretty solidly that, hey, we're going to be saving significant amount of hours per week. And, assuming that you're going to be working on this project for more than a week or two, the long run savings are obvious.
And it's almost like big data. Big data will answer your question, but it'll also introduce your ability to ask new questions that you never had before. You build a process like this, it'll solve and make it quicker to do what you're doing today. But now you can invest or start tinkering with other processes as well. Man, what if we did this every day? What if we did this twice a day? What if we had A/B testing? What if we did, you know what I mean? And all these things are like, whoa. You can't do that now because it's just too expensive.
Yeah,
what if
somebody might be building once a week and then realize with this process, if they go from a build takes, even if, in some hypothetical scenario, a build whole process only took 2 hours. But if you automated it all and it happens continuously within 10 minutes of every commit, that can greatly change the way your entire work environment works. Also, it has all these side benefits, like you said, like I mentioned before about the version numbers, where that might be something that people aren't keeping track of right now. But what about people who are not technical being able to make builds? I could have my level designer tweak something in my game.
Yeah, not my most expensive architect right now is the only guy I can ask to do
your
it.
Build engineers, your engineers, they can be focusing on the hard problems, but the easy stuff, like the level designer wants to build a version of 10 different versions of the level and play it and try it out.
Yeah,
they can do that themselves. The build works. They can download it themselves and be able to test that. And now they are enabled in a way that, for them, they had to give it off to a programmer and wait some indeterminate amount of time as a black box to be able to get something out.
All right, you guys have convinced me. The last thing I want to do is argue with Jennelle over this because she's always right. Tobia, developers listening to this and they're like, you know what? Why have I put it off so long? Where do you send a developer who's looking for more information?
So I have a URL set up, aka.ms game cloud builds. I'm sure we'll be able to. aka.ms/game cloud builds, where we have information including links to the GitHub repo where we had the exact build template that we use for GoodbyeWorld Games that you can look at based on and tweak as needed. And beyond that as well, Jennelle and I, if you ever have any questions or problems or you want to set this up for your own company, you find our Twitter handles, at our email addresses, we make it easy to find, and we can get you set up as well. I would also, I mentioned it before, but I would highly recommend the book, The Phoenix Project. And we're not affiliated with them in any way, but they are. It's an amazing book, and just reading it itself will, if you start applying the lessons you learn, can also greatly help.
Well, the Phoenix Project is sort of the VSM Bible to a lot of people. You know what I mean?
It really is.
It's like VSM for the common man because it's an easy read and it's got a nice story to it, and it just kind of pulls you along.
I would just recommend it if you like fictional drama.
So there's a lot of drama.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost like a historical drama but just inside your office. Yeah, that's wild. I like it. All right, guys, listen. If you're a developer and you're listening to this show and you've ever built software and you've hit build at the end, and you know that it needs to be tested. Now you know that you need to send it out. Wouldn't it be great that you would automate the entire process so you knew it was correct every single time? Why aren't you doing it? Well, maybe you never thought about it until Jennelle set you straight. Maybe you didn't know until you start reading all of the article that Tobia's put together so you can see how simple this is. And look, both of these guys took everything, put it on GitHub so you can reference it as well. Tobia, Jennelle, guys, awesome. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having us.